how much does a glass of champagne truly cost? For one major airline, the answer was everything it had. This is the story of a quiet moment of prejudice at 30,000 feet that triggered a corporate earthquake. When a flight attendant saw Dr. Isabella Sterling, a brilliant black surgeon, and denied her the same drink her white counterparts were enjoying, she made a catastrophic miscalculation. The attendant had no idea that Isabella's husband wasn't just another passenger. He was a silent titan of industry who was about to teach her and the entire airline a multi-billion-dollar lesson in respect. The world of first class is a carefully curated illusion. It's a hushed sanctuary of warm towels, lie-flat beds, and the gentle clinking of crystal, all designed to insulate its inhabitants from the mundane realities of travel, and indeed from the world itself. On board Aura Airlines Flight 72 from New York to London. This illusion was polished to a high sheen. The cabin was a symphony in beige and brushed chrome, where the air hummed with a quiet sense of importance. In seat 2A sat Dr. Isabella Sterling. To the casual observer, she was a striking woman, her dark skin a beautiful contrast to the cream-colored cashmere travel set she wore. Her hair was styled in intricate locks, adorned with delicate gold cuffs, a crown that spoke of pride and heritage. But Isabella was more than just an image of elegance. She was Dr. Sterling, one of the leading pediatric cardiothoracic surgeons in the country. Her hands, which now rested on the cool leather of her armrest, had performed miracles. They had restarted the hearts of children so small they could fit in the palm of her hand. She was a woman of immense substance, her brilliance matched only by her profound empathy, a quality honed over years of delivering life-altering news, both joyous and tragic, to anxious parents. She was in first class because she deserved to be. The trip was a last-minute decision, a brief respite before she was to deliver the keynote address at a major medical conference in London. She was tired, the emotional residue of a particularly grueling week clinging to her like a shroud. A glass of champagne she thought would be a small, perfect luxury to mark the transition from the relentless demands of her work to the brief peace of the journey ahead. Across the aisle in seat 2B was her husband, Harrison Sterling. Where Isabella's brilliance was a radiant light, Harrison's was a quiet, gravitational force. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored dark suit, no tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. He was reading a worn paperback, a collection of poetry, and seemed utterly absorbed. Nothing about him screamed wealth or power. There was no flashy watch, no ostentatious logo. He could have been a professor, an architect, a man of quiet intellectual pursuits. This anonymity was his greatest asset. Harrison Sterling was the founder and silent principal of Sterling Global Ventures, a private equity firm so vast and influential that its movements could alter the economic trajectory of entire nations. He operated in the shadows, a master of a universe of numbers, and calculated risks that was invisible to the vast majority of the population. He preferred it that way. His wealth was a tool, not an identity. His identity was being Isabella's husband. He had watched her over the past week, had seen the toll her work had taken. He saw the flicker of exhaustion in her eyes that she tried so hard to hide. This trip was his idea. "Let's just go," he'd said. "Breathe some different air." And so they had. The lead flight attendant moved through the cabin with a practiced, almost theatrical grace. Her name was Susan, and her name tag was pinned perfectly to her uniform. She had the brisk, brittle smile of someone who has spent 2 decades sorting passengers into categories of perceived importance. Her service was a performance, and she reserved her best material for those she deemed worthy. She laughed a little too loudly at the joke of a ruddy-faced man in 3D patting his shoulder with familiar ease. She engaged in a lengthy animated conversation with a woman in 1A about a shared love for a particular brand of handbag. She was a connoisseur of the subtle hierarchies of the cabin. When she arrived at their row, she first turned to the man seated in front of Harrison, Mr. Davenport, a boisterous man in a garish blazer who had been speaking loudly on his phone until the moment the cabin door closed. "Mr. Davenport, welcome back." The usual champagne to start. Susan beamed her smile, genuine and dazzling. "You know it, Susie." "Don't know how you remember," he boomed. "It's our pleasure to remember our most valued guests," she replied, her voice dripping with honey as she skillfully popped a cork. A cascade of golden bubbles filled a crystal flute, which she presented to him with a slight bow. Then she turned. Her entire demeanor shifted. The transformation was subtle but immediate. The brilliant smile became a tight professional line. Her eyes, which had sparkled for Mr. Davenport, became flat and dismissive as they rested on Dr. Isabella Sterling. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked. The warmth was gone, her tone clipped and perfunctory. Isabella, who had been observing the exchange with a growing sense of weary familiarity, offered a polite, gentle smile. "I would love a glass of champagne, please." Susan paused. It was a fractional hesitation, but it was laden with meaning. She glanced at the half-empty bottle in her hand, then back at Isabella. "I'm afraid we have to reserve this particular vintage for our Platinum and Centurion members on transatlantic routes. It's a new policy to ensure our most loyal customers are catered to." The lie was so bald-faced, so insulting in its lack of creativity, that it took Isabella's breath away for a second. Mr. Davenport, who was a platinum member of nothing but his local golf club, was happily sipping the reserved vintage not 5 feet away. The excuse was a flimsy veil for the ugly truth Susan had looked at Isabella, a black woman in a seat. Susan felt she didn't belong in, and had made a judgment. The sting was sharp and hot. It was a familiar pain, one Isabella had felt countless times in her life, in department stores where she was followed by security, in academic circles where her authority was questioned, in restaurants where she was handed the bill, while her white male colleagues were not. But familiarity did not dull the edge. In that moment, she wasn't Dr. Sterling, the celebrated surgeon. She was just another black woman being told in coded language that she was not welcome. Her first instinct was to flash her anger, to pull out her credentials and verbally dismantle the flight attendant's pathetic prejudice. But what would that accomplish? A scene. A forced, insincere apology. She was too tired for the performance of outrage. Instead, she drew on a lifetime of practice, a wellspring of grace that was both a shield and a weapon. "I see," Isabella said, her voice calm and even betraying none of the turmoil within. "In that case, I'll just have some sparkling water, please." "With lemon." Susan nodded, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. The challenge had been met and won. She had put this woman in her place. She turned to Harrison. "And for you, sir." Harrison Sterling slowly looked up from his book, his finger marking his place. He had seen everything. He had seen the shift in Susan's posture, the lie in her eyes, the carefully concealed hurt on his wife's face. His gaze, calm and unnervingly direct, settled on Susan. It was a look devoid of anger, but heavy with an intensity that she couldn't quite decipher. He held her gaze for a long moment before speaking, his voice quiet but resonant in the hushed cabin. Nothing for me, thank you. He didn't need to say anything more. The silence that followed was more potent than any complaint. He looked at Isabella, a silent question in his eyes. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a signal that she was okay, that she would endure. Harrison nodded back, his expression unreadable. He turned his gaze from Susan and looked out the window, but he wasn't seeing the clouds. He was seeing a chessboard, and the pieces were beginning to move. Susan, mistaking his silence for acquiescence, turned away and continued her service entirely oblivious to the fact that she had just insulted the two most powerful people on the plane, and in doing so had sealed her own fate and that of the entire airline. The flight settled into its rhythm, a long, monotonous drone, punctuated by the quiet hum of the engines. For most of the passengers in the first-class cabin, it was an oasis of tranquility. For Isabella, it became a masterclass in passive aggression, a slow-burning ordeal orchestrated by one woman. Susan's campaign of slights was a meticulously crafted work of art. When the meal service began, she presented the menus with a flourish to everyone except Isabella, to whom she simply recited the options in a bored monotone, as if reading a grocery list. When Isabella requested the seared halibut, Susan returned from the galley a few minutes later with an apologetic but not really apologetic look. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice just loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "It seems we've just run out of the halibut. We have the chicken primavera left." The implication was clear. The better option was gone, and this was what was left for the likes of her. Isabella, who could see Mr. Davenport being served the halibut at that very moment, simply nodded. "The chicken will be fine, thank you." Each act of grace on Isabella's part seemed to fuel Susan's disdain. She likely saw it as proof of her own superiority, a confirmation that this woman was not one to make waves. Harrison watched it all. He ate his own meal in silence, his focus absolute. He noted every forgotten water refill, every averted glance, every overly solicitous question directed at the white passengers, while his wife was treated like an afterthought. He observed the way Susan would practically genuflect while serving Mr. Davenport his third glass of whiskey, while she all but dropped a plastic cup of water on Isabella's tray table. Not everyone was oblivious. In seat 3A sat Professor Alistair Finch, an elderly man with a kind, wrinkled face and a tweed jacket that had seen better decades. He was a renowned historian, a man who had spent his life studying the nuances of human behavior and power dynamics. He saw exactly what was happening. His eyes, sharp and intelligent behind thick-rimmed glasses, would occasionally meet Isabella's. In them, she saw a flicker of shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the ugliness on display. He once caught Susan in the act of pointedly ignoring Isabella's empty glass and cleared his throat loudly, a small but significant act of dissent that earned him a glare from the flight attendant. The final straw came nearly 6 hours into the flight. Isabella, unable to sleep, had been trying to read, but the subtle, persistent hostility had created a tension that made it impossible to concentrate. She pressed the call button, hoping for a cup of tea. Minutes passed. 5. 10. Susan walked past her row 3 times pointedly, ignoring the illuminated light above Isabella's seat. She attended to other passengers, collected empty glasses, and even stopped to chat with the co-pilot, who had emerged from the cockpit for a moment. The call light remained on a small, glowing beacon of neglect. Finally, Harrison slowly and deliberately reached up and pressed his own call button. Within 30 seconds, Susan was at his side, her smile back in place. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" Harrison did not look at her. He continued to look at the page of his book. "My wife," he said, his voice as soft as it was steely, "pressed her call button 15 minutes ago. She would like a cup of chamomile tea, and he said, finally lifting his eyes to meet hers, would like your full name and the name of the flight purser. Now." The request, delivered with such quiet authority, finally pierced Susan's armor of arrogance. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. This was not the reaction she had expected. An angry outburst, yes. A threat to write a letter, perhaps. But this cold, calm demand was different. It was chilling. Still, her pride wouldn't let her back down completely. "My name is Susan Miller," she said, her voice a little tighter than before. "And the purser is Mr. Jennings. Is there a problem? I will determine that. Later?" Harrison replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. He then looked at Isabella. "Is there anything else I can get you, my love?" "No, darling," Isabella said, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. "The tea will be lovely." Shaken. Susan scurried away to fetch the tea. She returned with it moments later, her hands trembling almost imperceptibly as she placed it on Isabella's tray. She offered a mumbled, insincere apology for the delay. She avoided Harrison's gaze entirely. For the rest of the flight, she was a model of perfect if terrified service. She refilled Isabella's water glass before it was empty. She asked if she needed another blanket, a pillow, a magazine. But it was too late. The damage was done. The line had been crossed. Susan, flustered and now deeply unnerved, misjudged the man in seat 2B completely. She assumed he was an important lawyer, perhaps, or a mid-level executive who would write a strongly worded email that would result in a slap on the wrist for her. She couldn't possibly have conceived of the truth. As Susan retreated to the galley, her mind racing, Harrison Sterling calmly closed his book. The poetry was forgotten. He pulled his slim, encrypted satellite phone from his briefcase. Shielding it from view, he made a call. The connection was instantaneous, routed through a secure network that was invisible to commercial tracking. A voice answered on the first ring. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus Harrison said, his voice low. "Wake up the London team. I have a project for them. I want a complete workup on a publicly traded company, Aura Airlines and its parent corporation, Global Air Holdings. I want everything. Ownership structure, major shareholders, board members, debt-to-equity ratios, market vulnerabilities. I want it on my desk by the time we land at Heathrow." There was a pause on the other end, then a simple, "Consider it done, sir." Harrison disconnected the call. He put the phone away and turned to look at his wife. She had finally drifted off to sleep. Her face relaxed in a way he hadn't seen it in weeks. The sight of her peacefulness settled something in him. A cold, hard resolve. He had built an empire to protect his family, to create a world where they would be insulated from the ugliness he knew was always lurking beneath the surface. Today, that ugliness had breached the walls. It had dared to touch his wife. He would not just punish the offender. He would remove the system that allowed her to thrive. He would buy the very stage on which her ugly little drama had played out. He would buy Aura Airlines, and he would burn its culture down to the ground. The descent into London was shrouded in a thick grey morning mist. As the wheels of Aura Airlines Flight 72 touched down with a gentle bump on the tarmac of Heathrow Airport, a sense of finality settled over the cabin. For Susan Miller, it was the end of another routine flight. She offered a bright, manufactured smile to the disembarking first-class passengers, a smile that faltered slightly when she saw the Sterlings. She mumbled a goodbye in their direction, which they did not acknowledge. As they disappeared down the jet bridge, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The incident was over. They were gone. She would likely never see them again. For Harrison Sterling, the landing was just the beginning. As they walked through the terminal, Isabella leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for what you did back there," she said softly. "For asking for her name. It made me feel seen." Harrison wrapped an arm around her. "I will always see you," he said, "and I will always make sure you are seen." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. A black car was waiting for them, its driver holding a simple sign with the single letter S. They were whisked away from the chaos of the airport and into the quiet, leather-scented interior of a Bentley. As the car sped towards the city, Isabella drifted back to sleep. Harrison, however, was wide awake. He opened a sleek carbon fiber laptop, one that looked more like a piece of military hardware than a consumer device. On the screen was the dossier he had requested. It was compiled by his London team, a group of the sharpest financial minds in the world, and it was breathtakingly comprehensive. It laid bare the entire corporate anatomy of Global Air Holdings. He saw the intricate web of ownership, the institutional investors, the pension funds, the small percentage of shares held by the public. He saw the company's strengths, but more importantly, he saw its weaknesses. The company was proud, even arrogant. Its stock was considered stable, a blue-chip investment. But Harrison saw something else. He saw complacency. The majority of the shares were held by a handful of large passive investment funds that rarely interfered with management. The CEO, a man named Richard Sterling. A coincidence of name that brought a grim, ironic smile to Harrison's face, was known for his extravagant lifestyle and his focus on superficial metrics like on-time departures and cabin aesthetics, rather than deep-seated cultural health. The company was a beautiful, ripe fruit, seemingly perfect on the outside, but vulnerable. He convened a virtual meeting from the back of the moving car. On his screen, the faces of his most trusted lieutenants, appeared a global team of financial predators. Marcus, his London chief of staff, Lena, a ruthless legal counsel from Hong Kong, and David, a trading wizard based in New York. He came straight to the point. His voice was calm, almost unnaturally so. "Good morning. We are acquiring a controlling interest in Global Air Holdings. We will do it quickly, quietly, and decisively. This is not a negotiation. It is a hostile takeover." A ripple of shock went through the virtual room. Sterling Global Ventures was known for strategic long-term investments, not aggressive corporate raids. So Marcus began, his voice cautious. "Global Air is a behemoth. A public tender offer would be noisy. It would take weeks, months, maybe." "We are not making a tender offer," Marcus Harrison stated. "That is too public. We will do this through a series of coordinated block trades." "David, I want you to start buying on the open market, but keep the trades small and spread them across multiple brokers to avoid triggering any alarms." "Lena, I want you to approach the top 5 institutional shareholders. I know for a fact that 2 of them are over-leveraged in the commercial real estate market and are desperate for liquidity. We will offer them a significant premium, 25% above yesterday's closing price. But the offer is only good for 24 hours. It will be an all-cash deal. They won't be able to refuse." It was a stunningly audacious plan. A financial blitzkrieg designed to seize control before the company's leadership even knew they were under attack. For the next 72 hours, the financial world felt a series of tremors, though few could identify the source. The stock price of Global Air Holdings, GAH, began to climb steadily, at first, then sharply. Financial news networks buzzed with speculation. Was a competitor making a move? Was a foreign government trying to acquire a strategic asset? Inside the opulent headquarters of Airline's CEO Richard Sterling was in a state of escalating panic. He was a man defined by his image, the sharp suits, the corner office with the panoramic view, the carefully cultivated reputation as a titan of the industry. Now his company was being wrestled from his grasp by a ghost. "What do you mean you don't know who it is?" he bellowed at his chief financial officer. "Billions of dollars are moving, and you can't trace the source. But Harrison's operation was a masterwork of stealth. The trades were executed through a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore accounts, a financial ghost network that was impossible to track in real time. The offers made to the institutional funds were bound by ironclad non-disclosure agreements presented as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity they couldn't afford to pass up. They took the money and ran. By the third day, it was over. Lena called Harrison. "It's done, sir. We crossed the 51% threshold an hour ago. We have control." Harrison was sitting with Isabella in the garden of a small, discreet hotel in the English countryside. He had told her nothing of his plan, wanting to shield her from the storm he was about to unleash. He simply wanted her to rest to heal. "Thank you, Lena," he said quietly, and ended the call. Isabella looked at him over the rim of her teacup. "You've been busy," she said. It wasn't a question. He smiled. There was a problem that required my attention. The news broke like a thunderclap. An obscure holding company, HSG Investments, a name that meant nothing to the public, had filed the requisite paperwork, officially declaring its new status as the majority shareholder of Global Air Holdings. Richard Sterling was apoplectic. He demanded a meeting. He wanted to face this mysterious corporate raider who had stolen his kingdom from under him. He instructed his assistant to schedule an emergency board meeting for the following Monday. He wanted to meet the representative of HSG Investments face to face. He had no idea he was about to meet his namesake, and he had no idea that the fate of his entire career had been sealed by a single glass of champagne that was never poured. The Airline's boardroom was a cathedral of corporate power. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the London skyline from the floor-to-ceiling windows. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and fear. The remaining board members, a collection of pale, grim-faced men, and 2 women, sat stiffly in their leather chairs. They were waiting for the arrival of the phantom who had seized their company. At the head of the table sat Richard Sterling. Today his usual swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, belligerent energy. He felt cornered, humiliated. He had spent the weekend trying to dig up information on HSG Investments, but had hit a wall of impenetrable legal firewalls. He expected the door to open and reveal a smug, Gordon Gekko-type corporate raider, a man he could understand, a man he could fight. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the boardroom doors swung open. A junior executive nervously announced, "The representatives from HSG Investments are here." Into the room walked Harrison and Dr. Isabella Sterling. A wave of stunned silence washed over the room. The board members exchanged confused glances. They saw a well-dressed black couple, elegant and poised, but not the corporate sharks they had been bracing for. Richard Sterling stared at them, his brow furrowed in utter bewilderment. He didn't recognize them. To him, they were just people. They didn't register on his radar of importance. "I believe there's been a mistake," Richard said, his tone condescending. "This is a closed board meeting. We're waiting for the new majority shareholder." Harrison Sterling walked calmly to the head of the table opposite Richard. Isabella stood by his side, her presence radiating a quiet, unshakable dignity. "There is no mistake, Mr. Sterling," Harrison said, his voice level and clear, yet carrying an authority that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. "I am Harrison Sterling. This is my wife, Dr. Isabella Sterling, and my firm, HSG Investments, is the entity that now holds a 51% controlling interest in this company. We are the majority shareholder." The name Harrison Sterling hung in the air. Richard's face went from confused to pale with shock. The coincidence of their shared surname was a cruel twist of the knife. The other board members began whispering frantically, pulling out their phones to search the name. What they found would have sent a chill down their spines. Whispers of a reclusive billionaire, a financial phantom known only in the highest echelons of global finance. That's impossible," Richard stammered, his bravado crumbling into dust. "Is it?" Harrison continued, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces around the table. "You see, my wife and I had a rather illuminating experience on one of your aircraft last week, Flight 72 from JFK, in first class." He paused, letting the statement sink in. He then proceeded to recount the incident, not with anger, but with the cold, brutal precision of a surgeon excising a tumor. He detailed every slight, every coded insult, every moment of deliberate neglect. He described the lie about the reserved champagne. He described the missing halibut. He described the ignored call light. He spoke in a calm, factual monotone that was more chilling than any tirade. As he spoke, a dawning horror spread across Richard Sterling's face. An incident with a flight attendant. This colossal, multi-billion-dollar corporate raid was because of a flight attendant. It was so disproportionate, so outside the realm of his understanding of how the world worked, that he could barely process it. Then Isabella spoke. Her voice, unlike Harrison's, was not cold. It was filled with a powerful, resonant humanity that cut through the sterile corporate atmosphere. "This is not about a glass of champagne, gentlemen," she said, her eyes locking onto Richard's. "It is about a culture that you, Mr. Sterling, as the leader of this company, have allowed to fester. A culture where an employee feels empowered to look at a black woman in a first-class seat and assume she does not belong. A culture where her dignity is considered disposable." She spoke of the feeling of being rendered invisible, of having her life's achievements erased in an instant by a single act of prejudice. Her words were not an accusation. They were a testimony. And in the face of her dignified pain, the boardroom's armor of arrogance and power simply dissolved. The board members could not meet her gaze. Harrison stepped forward again, his voice dropping to an icy calm. "The rot in a fish starts from the head. Your company's culture, Mr. Sterling, is a direct reflection of your leadership. It is a culture of complacency, of surface-level luxury, that papers over a foundation of systemic disrespect. That ends today." He gestured to a leather portfolio his assistant had placed on the table. "My first act as the new owner of this company is to demand your immediate resignation. My second is to request the full employment records for the entire crew of Flight 72, with a particular focus on one Miss Susan Miller." Richard Sterling slumped in his chair, defeated. The fight was over before it had even begun. He had been checkmated by a man he had never seen coming, all because of an employee he wouldn't have been able to pick out of a lineup. Meanwhile, in a crew lounge at Heathrow, Susan Miller was gossiping with a colleague, recounting a story about a particularly difficult passenger on her last flight. Her phone buzzed. It was a call from the Vice President of Human Resources, a man who had never called her in her entire 20-year career. "Susan," his voice was strained, panicked. "There's been an incident, an ownership change. We have to let you go. Your contract is being terminated effective immediately for gross professional misconduct and actions detrimental to the company's brand and value." Susan laughed. "Is this a joke? What are you talking about? Detrimental to the company's value? Just pack your things, Susan," the VP said, his voice cracking. "Security will escort you from the premises. Your credentials have been revoked." The line went dead. Susan stared at her phone, her face a mask of disbelief. The world tilted on its axis. She had no idea what had just happened. She only knew that the comfortable, secure life she had built for herself, a life where she was the arbiter of who belonged and who didn't, had just been utterly and completely obliterated. The immediate karma had arrived swift and merciless. But the true reckoning for her, and for the entire airline, was just beginning. The firing of Susan Miller was not the final strike. It was merely the sound of the surgical steel tray being set down before the main operation began. For Harrison and Isabella, sterling, true justice was never about the fate of a single, prejudiced employee. It was about dissecting the malignant corporate culture that had nourished her actions. Simple revenge is a wildfire, hot and indiscriminate. What they planned was a controlled burn, one designed to clear away the rot and allow for new, healthier growth. The first shockwave after the boardroom coup was the memo that landed in the inboxes of all 50,000 Global Air Holdings employees. It announced the immediate departure of CEO Richard Sterling and several board members. But it was the second paragraph that caused a collective gasp across the global company. The role of interim chief executive officer would be assumed by Dr. Isabella Sterling. The decision was a masterstroke of psychological warfare and symbolic power. The woman who had been deemed unworthy of the airline's basic courtesies was now its ultimate authority. Isabella herself had been floored when Harrison proposed it in the quiet of their London hotel suite. "I can't," she had said, shaking her head. "Harrison, I'm a surgeon. I save lives. I don't run billion-dollar corporations." "You do both," he replied, taking her hands. "You lead teams in high-stakes environments. You make life-or-death decisions based on meticulous data. And most importantly, you have something that Richard Sterling and his entire board lack: an unbreakable moral compass. This company doesn't need a new CFO right now, Bella. It needs a soul. It needs you to be its conscience." Her first day as CEO was surreal. She walked through the opulent, hushed corridors of the executive floor, the very air seeming to hold its breath. She entered Richard Sterling's former office, a cavernous space of glass and chrome overlooking the city. A monument to ego. Her first act was to have a maintenance team remove the ridiculously oversized mahogany desk. She replaced it with a simple round table. "I'm here to collaborate, not to command," she told her new, terrified executive assistant. Her second act was to bring in the wolves. She didn't hire a standard HR consultancy. She retained a firm named Veritas Solutions, a boutique and famously relentless DEI group known for its forensic, no-stone, unturned cultural audits. They were corporate investigators, not workshop facilitators. For 6 weeks, the Veritas team descended into the heart of Aura Airlines. They conducted hundreds of confidential interviews, analyzed terabytes of internal communications, and reviewed a decade of HR records. What they uncovered was a portrait of deeply ingrained institutional decay. They found a promote-from-within culture that was in practice a promote-who-you-play-golf-with system. They found glaring pay and promotion disparities for women and employees of color in every department. But the most damning discovery was what the Veritas team grimly nicknamed the digital graveyard. It was a forgotten server where tens of thousands of customer complaints flagged by a rudimentary algorithm as sensitive were routed and left to die. Here were the voices of countless passengers detailing experiences of racism, homophobia, and religious discrimination, all systematically ignored. The vice president of in-flight services, a crony of the former CEO, was found to have personally dismissed numerous complaints against Susan Miller, and others like her, often with notes like "passenger oversensitive" or "staff narrative more credible." Armed with the Veritas report, a document that read less like a corporate review and more like an indictment, Isabella acted. There was no gentle transition. It was a purge. The VPs of HR and in-flight services were terminated. Division heads and managers implicated in suppressing complaints or fostering biased environments were given two options: resign immediately or be fired for cause. The executive floor was decimated. In their place, Isabella and Harrison, with the help of a top-tier executive search firm, began to build a new leadership team. They found their permanent CEO in Maria Rodriguez, a sharp, empathetic Latina executive renowned for her ability to turn around toxic corporate cultures. Her first words to Isabella were, "A company's brand is the promise it makes. Its culture is whether or not it keeps that promise. It looks like we have a lot of promises to start keeping." With the new leadership in place, they instituted the Sterling Standard, a complete philosophical and practical overhaul of company policy. Intensive mandatory anti-bias and empathy training became a prerequisite for continued employment. This was not a one-day seminar with stale coffee and PowerPoint slides. It was a multi-day immersion. Flight crews were put through high-fidelity simulations, some using VR technology, forcing them to experience a flight from the perspective of a marginalized passenger. Pilots and executives alike were required to participate in candid, difficult conversations about privilege and power, led by sociologists and psychologists. Failure to complete or pass the training was grounds for dismissal. While the airline was being reborn, the karma for Susan Miller continued its slow, grinding descent. The story of the takeover was inextricably linked to her, and while the Sterlings never mentioned her name publicly, the aviation industry is a small, gossipy world. She was quietly, unofficially blacklisted. Applications to other legacy carriers went unanswered. Recruiters who once courted her suddenly didn't return her calls. Her career, the bedrock of her identity and sense of superiority, was gone. The financial fallout was swift. The upscale apartment, the European holidays, the designer handbags, it all vanished. She was forced to sell her home and move into a cramped, dingy flat. Her savings dwindled. Eventually, her pride shattered. She took the only job she could get, a housekeeping position at a sprawling, impersonal airport hotel. The hard karma was not just in her fall from grace, but in the brutal poetry of her new reality. Her days were now spent in silent, invisible service. She cleaned up after the very people she used to judge the loud families, the travelers of every color and creed. She was no longer the gatekeeper of a premium experience. She was the one scrubbing the toilets. She who had once wielded dismissiveness as a weapon was now treated with the same casual indifference by stressed travelers and overworked managers. The cruelty was not in poverty, but in the forced daily dose of humility. She was forced to live the life of the people she once believed were beneath her. Back at Aura, the final piece of the transformation was putting the new internal reality on display for the world. The airline was rebranded. The new marketing campaign was a revolution. It featured a montage of real travelers, not actors. A young man in a wheelchair being assisted onto a flight with a look of genuine excitement. A Muslim woman in a hijab laughing with a flight attendant. A family of black travelers being treated with the warmth usually reserved for celebrities. The campaign's slogan, unveiled in a powerful ad, was the ultimate promise born from a painful truth. Aura Airlines, where everyone belongs. The company had been taken down to the studs, its rotten framework exposed and ripped out, and was now being rebuilt plank by painful plank into something strong, worthy, and new. The story of the Aura Airlines takeover did not simply break, it detonated. In the hyper-connected consciousness of the 21st century, it was the perfect fuel for a digital wildfire. It began not as a formal press release, but as a series of frantic whispers on financial message boards, which quickly coalesced into a stunning report by a savvy aviation blogger. From there, it leaped to Twitter, and the inferno began. The hashtag #BuyTheAirline achieved a velocity rarely seen, a viral singularity that transcended news and became culture. It wasn't just a hashtag. It was a rallying cry, a fantasy of ultimate empowerment for anyone who had ever been slighted, ignored, or made to feel small. Memes flooded the internet. Harrison Sterling's stoic face photoshopped onto the body of a knight slaying a dragon with the Aura logo. Dr. Isabella Sterling seated on a throne made of first-class airline seats, a champagne flute in hand, with the caption, "The customer is always right." TikTok videos reenacted the scene with dramatic flair. YouTube essayists produced hours-long deep dives into the financial mechanics of the Sterling Gambit and the socio-cultural significance of the clapback of the century. The story sparked a global conversation that raged from morning talk shows to university ethics classes. It was a Rorschach test for society. Some saw Harrison as a hero, a modern-day Count of Monte Cristo, who had used his immense power for righteous justice. Others, particularly from the established old guard of wealth, muttered nervously about the dangerous precedent of such a disproportionate response, calling it an abuse of capitalist power. But their voices were drowned out by a deafening public chorus of approval. The narrative was simply too compelling. A quiet, brilliant black woman, insulted by petty prejudice, is defended by her loving husband, who instead of merely complaining to the manager, buys the entire company and remakes it in the image of dignity. Recognizing they could not remain silent specters in their own story, the Sterlings agreed to a single exclusive interview. They chose a journalist renowned for her integrity and incisive questioning, ensuring the narrative would be handled with depth, not sensationalism. They did not meet her in a sterile office, but in the library of their Connecticut home, a warm, book-lined space that spoke of intellect and family, a deliberate contrast to the cold power of a boardroom. Isabella, poised and eloquent in a simple navy blue dress, became the voice of their actions. This was never about revenge. She stated, her gaze steady and clear. Revenge is a barren and finite act. It ends with the punishment of one person. We were not interested in that. We were interested in accountability, which is a generative force. This was about dismantling a culture that empowers an employee to believe that a person of color is an anomaly in a space of success. That employee, Miss Miller, was not an anomaly herself. She was a symptom of a systemic illness. You cannot cure an illness by treating a single symptom. You must heal the entire body. Harrison, who had remained silent for most of the interview, a quiet anchor by his wife's side, was asked a final question. Was his action not at its heart an act of anger? He considered the question for a long moment, his eyes finding Isabella's. "I built my company to provide a shield for my family," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "A shield from want, from instability. But I learned that a shield is useless if the air itself is poison. What my wife experienced was a poison of disrespect that is all too common. My actions were not born of anger. Anger is a hot, fleeting thing. This was born of purpose. The purpose was to detoxify the air, not just for my wife, but for every person who will ever set foot on one of our planes. It was the most necessary, logical, and loving business decision I have ever made." His words solidified the narrative. This was not a hostile takeover. It was a moral one. The Sterling effect, as business journals began calling it, sent shockwaves through the corporate world. Competing airlines like the fictional Apex Air and Transcontinental scrambled to announce sweeping new DEI initiatives and top-to-bottom cultural reviews, terrified that they might harbor their own Susan Miller and become the next viral cautionary tale. The incident became a case study at Harvard Business School on brand vulnerability and the immense financial cost of a toxic culture. It was during this time that Professor Alistair Finch, the elderly historian from Flight 72, published his op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, titled On Corporate Decency and the Purchase of Justice. It landed with the force of an intellectual thunderclap. He wrote, "I witnessed not merely a microaggression, but a tear in the social fabric, a casual denial of dignity that has been the kindling for historical injustices far greater." What the Sterlings did was to take the logic of capitalism, the acquisition of assets, and infuse it with the logic of morality. They demonstrated that a balance sheet is not merely a record of financial health, but of moral health as well. They did not just buy an airline. They purchased the opportunity to mandate decency, and in doing so, offered a masterclass in 21st century power. The op-ed silenced almost all remaining critics. In a moment of perfect schadenfreude, a tabloid later reported that Mr. Davenport had been overheard at a Palm Beach country club, loudly complaining that Aura Airlines had become insufferably woke. The anecdote went viral, and he was mercilessly mocked online as the poster child for the oblivious privilege the Sterlings had so thoroughly vanquished. But the most enduring part of their legacy was yet to be built. Isabella, using her new platform, officially launched the Sterling Skies Foundation. At a launch gala, filled not with billionaires, but with community leaders, educators, and ambitious young students, she laid out its mission. It was not a charity. It was an engine of change. The foundation would provide comprehensive scholarships and mentorship for underrepresented youth to become pilots, aerospace engineers, aircraft mechanics, and flight attendants, creating new pathways into an industry that had historically been insular and exclusionary. "We do not want to just open the door for those who have been shut out," Isabella declared in her keynote address, her voice ringing with passion. "We want to give them the tools to build a whole new house with a stronger foundation and more windows." A year later, the world of Aura Airlines was transformed. The cabins had been subtly redesigned, featuring art from a diverse range of global artists. The old stuffy atmosphere was gone, replaced by one of professional warmth. Harrison and Isabella Sterling were on a flight to Cape Town, where the first international chapter of the Sterling Skies Foundation was being launched. They sat in their familiar seats, 2A and 2B. As the plane reached cruising altitude, a flight attendant approached them. She was a young, poised black woman named Jasmine. Her uniform was immaculate, but it was her eyes that shone with a bright, intelligent light. She addressed them with a warmth that was genuine, not scripted. "Mir and Dr. Sterling, welcome aboard. My name is Jasmine. It is truly an honor to have you with us today." Isabella smiled. "It's a pleasure to be here, Jasmine." Jasmine paused, a flicker of happy emotion crossing her face. "Dr. Sterling, I'm one of the first recipients of the Sterling Skies Aeronautics Scholarship. Because of you, I'm here. This was my dream." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She looked at this brilliant young woman, the living, breathing embodiment of the change they had fought for. She was the restorative karma, the proof that they had not just punished a wrong, but had cultivated a new right. Isabella glanced at Harrison, who was looking at Jasmine with a quiet, profound pride. He reached over and took Isabella's hand. Jasmine, regaining her professional composure, smiled brightly. "To start your journey," she said, her voice full of a joy that felt personal, "may I offer you a glass of our finest champagne?" A single tear of overwhelming happiness escaped Isabella's eye and traced a path down her cheek. The memory of the past sting was still there, but it was now a faint echo, drowned out by a beautiful, triumphant symphony. This was not just a glass of champagne. It was a full circle. It was validation. It was hope bubbling up in a crystal flute. "Yes, Jasmine," Isabella said, her voice thick with an emotion that encompassed the entire incredible journey. "Yes, I would love that very much." That single defiant pop of a champagne cork marks the end of an incredible journey. It began with an ugly act of prejudice and ended with a testament to the power of love, dignity, and righteous action. The story of Isabella and Harrison Sterling is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most effective way to fight a system is not to leave it, but to buy it and rebuild it from the foundation up. They turned a moment of personal humiliation into a global movement for corporate accountability and human dignity. If this story inspired you, if it made you believe in the power of fighting back against injustice, then please help us share it. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. And we want to hear from you. What would you change if you had the power to buy any company in the world? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.